Fantastic. Welcome to, I think this is the third forum that we've had and the first for this year. I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. So here we are in 2021, new year, same old pandemic. Hopefully everyone's doing a little better at this stage of the year than quite a number of us were doing in the second half or the latter part of last year, and particularly our colleagues from Victoria and Melbourne. I hope you've been able to get out and move around a bit more than you were able to for a large part of last year. We're right on the edge of the commencement of the vaccination program within the next week or so, and frontline workers will be very much in the forefront of actually getting vaccinated, and I imagine that's going to include quite a number of our members, depending on where they're working at their location within the health workforce throughout the country. But one of the things I think it's worth mentioning right now as we move into this next phase of the response to COVID-19 is that there's been a lot of attention and focus on mental health for a whole lot of reasons, for quite a few months now. And I think one of the things we need to be on guard and watchful is that, as the population starts to become vaccinated in the coming months, we've got to be very careful not to let, the focus on mental health just basically to dissolve and move away. And I think our college can play an important part in that. Our members, all of us, can play an important part of that. The mental health impacts of the pandemic are likely to go on for years and potentially decades. But I can imagine that as people become vaccinated, they might forget that. As life starts, hopefully, to get back to something resembling the pre-COVID norm. So I think it's something that's well worthwhile keeping in our mind and keeping very much on the agenda within our college and of course, within our profession. A couple of things that I noticed coming through with the pre-submitted questions, a number of issues coming through that touch on operational matters, and Stephen's with us tonight, so hopefully he'll be able to talk to some of those when we get those questions, and then any other questions coming up in the open forum section a little later on in the program. But one of the things I'd point out is that I'm not sure how familiar people are with this, but over the holiday period, we had a few more staff leave. So our already significantly reduced staff complement was further reduced across the holiday period, and that's created some further pressures on staff. So I think as we're asking, and I think it's very appropriate to ask questions about whether things are being followed through on and how office processes and communication processes are functioning, and if there are issues surrounding them, what can be done to address them. But just bear in mind that we have very limited salaried staff at the moment who are responsible for really dealing with these areas. So we just need to sort of think a bit about the kinds of pressures our college staff are working through as we try and get this sorted out. I'm certainly aware of these issues. Stephen's been keeping me informed, and I know other board members are, so it's high on our list of priorities. But these things are never rectified immediately. They take some, a process to work through it, and I imagine that's going to include a process of appointing new staff and getting them settled down within their new positions within the college staff. Hopefully you've noticed with the last college communication, I think some people might have formed the impression that there hasn't been much going on in terms of college responses to the Productivity Commission report and other initiatives going on at the state and Commonwealth level across the country. We've actually been putting out fairly regular media releases, and I only realised recently that they weren't necessarily being disseminated to members. So I have asked that as of the last one we put out, that all members have access to those as soon as possible after they've been disseminated to media outlets. And you will have seen the most recent one published within last week's College Communication, which was commenting on the really important issue about the misrepresentation of mental health nursing numbers across the country. So I think there was a very assertive press release put out there. There have been quite a number of others, you know, in the time frame of the current board, and of course regularly prior, you know, during the time frame of the previous boards as well. But from now on, all members will actually also have access to those media releases very close to the time in which they're disseminated to media outlets as well. The other thing I'd like to mention in my preliminary comments is that the college does have representation at senior levels, at state and Commonwealth levels. Stephen has certainly been a member on a number of very high-level committees where he's been representing our interests at that level. Recently, I've just been appointed to the Commonwealth Chief Nursing and Midwifery Officers Key Strategic Reference Group, and the first meeting of that group that I'm attending is tomorrow. I think it's important that people understand that any representatives we have in the college to high-level committees of that nature, when you sign up to something like that, you're necessarily made to sign a confidentiality undertaking. So there are limits on what we can actually disclose. And it may not be the case that all college members are aware of that. So if you feel that we're not giving you detailed information about what's happening at that level, there are certain circumstances where just legally we're not permitted to do so. So we can certainly give you an idea of the direction of policy decisions or things that are likely to be unfolding that would be of interest to our college members. But I think it's important to understand that we're not necessarily in a position to be able to come back and report in detail about the business operating within those kinds of committees. And if we do so, we would be in breach of a legal undertaking that we've entered into upon joining those committees. So I just wanted to make that clear to people, and I think that might have some bearing on one or two of the questions we've been asked in the pre-submitted questions tonight. If people want me to, or Stephen, to elaborate more on that as we get into the discussion section, please let us know and we can. I think that's enough from me at this stage, and I'd like to introduce our CEO, Stephen Jackson.
Oh, thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and a new year, as you've said. You stole a lot of my words that I was going to comment on, so I'll just zip through what I've got in mind. As I said, it's a new year.
President's prerogative, Stephen.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no question there. Certainly staffing changes. We had with the opening of the borders to Victoria just before Christmas, our membership officer jumped ship to get back to family and to move down to that side of the border, which was not expected and a bit out of the blue. So we managed to get someone in to hold the fort there, and that person didn't work out. So I've got somebody else in now who's covering bases nicely. We're starting interviews tomorrow for a comms person here based in Canberra, so that the team in Canberra can be a team and be available on the phones a lot more effectively than too many remote workers. So over that period, there was stuff to get done, but unfortunately, a lot of it fell to me and to Irene and Lauren, the stalwarts of the place, I suppose. And it's probably worth noting that 18 months ago, there were 3 times the staff in this place, but we're still working through the same level of workload. So the staff here are doing a remarkable job, and I'm very pleased with what they do. I'm very proud of what they're doing. And yes, things fall through the cracks, absolutely, but we are certainly focusing on delivering for the members as best we can. Operationally, been very busy to minimise costs and to make stuff, get it out there as quickly as we can. A lot of SIG and events have been organised starting now, and of course, a big one that's happening at the moment is the international conference. And Ellen might know a little bit about that one, but that's starting very much on the boil now. We have negotiated locations and we're talking to speakers, and there's a lot of work to be done in the background there, and that's Ellen's baby, well and truly. As Mike indicated, there's a lot of conversations happening with the government at just about every level. I've had time with the Victorian government with their Head to Health initiative, has been part of that. Department of Health and other departments here in Canberra, I've spent time with them. And interestingly, as Mike mentioned there, a lot of these conversations, both legally, we can't talk about it, but also from a relationship point of view, we don't want to break those relationships and the access we have to these senior players in a lot of the departments and a lot of the decision makers and the politicians as well. And on more than one occasion, I've had feedback relatively recently saying that it's great to talk to the college because you're not asking us for money specifically to fund the college, but you're also very confidential, and we're not getting harassed by general people that might have an interest in a particular place. So it's very important that we maintain those relationships, critical. And of course, there's the legal side of it as well. But we talk about what we can as much as we possibly can. But the focus is very much the college, what we do, and the membership. There's a lot of movement, recognition of credentialed mental health nurses as a subject on a regular basis. A lot is still trying to understand just where they fit in the firmament, and I've been talking to department, including NDIS recently, which is positive, and the Department of Health had quite a rejig of their mental health areas, and I've been in there educating them as to what the college does and who mental health nurses are and where they fit. Defence is very keen on them and on the qualifications and just where that sits. And that goes full circle back to that Productivity Commission exercise, which we continue to go through as to the undergrad versus the postgrads and everything in between. And we understand where the college sits in that, but where we take that depends on how much influence we want to have in that space. Conversations with Nursing Midwifery Board as well, and AHPRA, fascinating exercise where their focus is very much on the regulation of professions, whereas ours is very much on the outcomes, if you like, the results with patients. And trying to get those crossing is an interesting exercise, but they're very positive and keen to talk further. It takes time. How long has the college been around for, and what has it achieved? Yeah. So probably one thing, just an extension of what Mike was saying, is that, as I said earlier, we've got a third the staff that we had 18 months ago, and there's a lot of work on, and the guys are working well and working hard. So please accept that things will take a bit of time. We'll answer the phone when we can. The staff are under constant pressure because we're trying to maintain what was happening 18 months ago with 3 times the staff. And so it's a tricky one, but the important stuff, which is the communication with the departments, the communication with the politicians, the feeding information, the responses are happening. And it just takes a little bit of time occasionally. And occasionally the thing that falls off the end is communicating that back to the membership. But we do what we can. So happy to converse and to answer questions as we go further into this. And I'll hand this back to Mike to take us to the next step.
Thank you, Stephen. So we'll move to that part of the program in which we've received some pre-submitted questions. I've certainly had an opportunity to have a look at these, and in a couple of cases I can make some comments, but I'll also call upon board members and Stephen if any of those colleagues have anything they'd like to say or add. There are 1 or 2 of the questions I think that there would be other board members in a better position to be able to provide a comment than myself. So we'll see how we go as we get through. Thank you, Ellen, for putting those up for us. So this first group are from Claire, and the first of those relates to one of the things we've just been talking about. Channels of communication are not working. I'm chair of the psychotherapy group with no way to effectively contact the members to keep them in the loop, update them on what the reference group are doing, ask for their input or promote webinars, accreditation, clinical supervision, networking activities, and so on. I certainly understand the frustrations involved in all of this. I think some of what myself and Stephen have just said would give you some background to that. Operationally, Stephen, in terms of how soon we think we're going to be able to improve some of those communication processes, to particularly to support groups that we're really trying to encourage to get up and running again, you know, in the SIG, in the SIGs, for instance. Any comments there?
We're very keen to improve this. Of course, it's the resource to get it done. One of the issues, there's a couple of different channels to go down. We've got 3 or 4 products we're looking at. Making a decision as to which one is probably a key exercise, because the last thing you want with emails is the lack of privacy, where emails go to everyone, and as we've seen in the past, emails to the wrong person can cause all sorts of pain. So moving away from e-lists, absolutely, but a more controlled email list where the SIG chairs and the branch managers, the branch owners are able to do that is being worked on at the moment. I'll just see if Ellen wants to make a comment in that space, because Ellen owns that process and we're proceeding down a path. Ellen?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So look, communication between these groups is so important. It's the reason we set them up, is so that we can create these support networks and information sharing and education opportunities and all of the great stuff that branches and SIGs are doing. And it's super important that we have channels of communication that work. About a year ago, this was under like significant discussion, having, you know, assessed that e-lists really don't work and that they're kind of clunky and awful, and we want to move really quickly on it. We don't want to get stuck in, you know, decision-making processes and things like that. But we also want to make sure that we're choosing the right medium for communication. So there's a range of options available, and we're hoping to make that decision really quickly as to what channels best work for our groups, because it's super important that we do that, or else the enthusiasm and the engagement that we have in those groups will just melt away, and that's not something that we want. We want to continue that engagement in those special interest groups and branches. So there's a number of cool ideas that we have, and we just got to find the right one that's cost effective. And I have had a chat with Stephen about that today, and we have some pretty good deadlines for that to happen so that we can just get it done.
Yep. Thanks, Ellen. Claire, I notice you've just unmuted. Is there something you'd like to say at this stage, or would you prefer to wait until we've moved through your questions and ask questions in relation to any of them?
Oh, I'll wait. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. The second one, around the e-list, and I think that sort of just builds on the first question. Is there anything we can add in relation to that? Probably not. I see you're nodding, sort of. You're happy with that. What you've heard, Claire, are you, in terms of okay. The newsletter is lacking in substantive detail from the CEO. I suspect some of what Stephen and I have said about the confidentiality undertakings explains some of that. But Stephen, I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to say about that, or Claire, would you like to elaborate on what in particular you'd like, that in terms of what we're actually able to provide?
Yeah, I think there was a sense in the past that decisions were being made and we were kind of sold out in certain ways, like with the way the minute ended up and all of that. And I think even though we don't need to know all the, you know, the fine detail, we would like, I think, indications of the direction, or even the thinking of the college as to what it's enthusiastic for. It would be really kind of helpful for us in the special interest groups to kind of marry what we're doing with what the college is doing, because otherwise we're kind of working in the dark or working in cross directions. Yeah. We want to work collaboratively as much as we can, so it's really important that we have a sort of a bit more detail, I think, in the newsletter, or I don't know, whatever, if there's a better way of communicating, I'm not sure, but
yeah,
you know, we just need to know a little bit more about the nitty, you know, about the
Look, I think they're very reasonable comments, and Stephen, I think there probably is some flexibility for us to be able to give perhaps more a general overview of likely directions and things without actually disclosing anything that we're prohibited from disclosing. Do you agree?
Oh, fair call. It's just a matter of fitting it into the busy schedule. So I think we'll discuss that further on Monday night at the board meeting. But yeah, I have no problem with providing more, but it's just a question of what else doesn't happen when you spend the time doing that sort of thing.
Yep. The fourth dot point, you'd like to know about what's happening with the revised website. Any comments? Is that, Stephen, is that one for you or?
Yeah, that information's there. We need more detail, and Ellen's looking after that. We'll chase that one down. But we had the new website go live just before Christmas, and that's been tidied. All the back end's been tidied up at the moment. So getting to specific areas just takes a bit of time, and Ellen's looking after that now.
Yep. Thanks.
Hello, I just want to add something. Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm also a member of the Australian College of Nursing, whereby I recently, last week, I met the MP of in Melbourne, particular area. So when you talk about whatever you discuss is confidential and there's privacy involved, I agree with that. And I agree with Claire that even though they are as confidential as they can be, it is important for us, part as a member of the organization, to know what is going on and give a little summary of what's been happening, but not in big detail. Just like what I've done, what the ACN does. So just before we go and meet, before I met the MP Julian Hills from the southeastern area of Melbourne, they sent me an email and said, if you can emphasize on this particular kind of questions, and then we all have that kind of momentum, and we're all homogeneous on the same level of what we're going to talk. So, but I have to admit that there is little done from the College of Mental Health Nurses, whereby these kind of situations are allowed to us to be able to speak out. Understand there's privacy and confidentiality, but it's also concerned us. So we need to have a bit of a summary of what's going on, at least. Yeah.
Yep. Well, I think we've just indicated that we'll try and provide that where we can. There is a long history of representation to politicians and senior health bureaucrats at Commonwealth and state level. And in previous roles I've had in the college, I've certainly been involved in meeting Commonwealth ministers with Kim Ryan, for instance, and other sorts of venues. And I know many other people have. So I wouldn't want people to think that this is relatively new and we've not done it previously. In fact, we have a history of doing that goes back decades. One of the things I think that we may have paid perhaps more attention to was operating at the Commonwealth level. I think probably we need to match our activities at the Commonwealth level with an equal amount of attention being given to state and territory senior bureaucrats and politicians. So we're moving on multiple fronts. And I suspect we went through a period of time where that didn't happen in the college, perhaps in the last 4 or 5 years, as much as it did much earlier. So I've spoken to Stephen about that, and I think there's a general agreement that that will be the sort of direction we move in from here on in. So we don't take the pressure off the Commonwealth, but we start to ask similar questions at the state and territory level, and we'll be reliant on people at the state and territory level to be able to do that with us. I mean, obviously 1 or 2 people can't get around to every senior politician or bureaucrat across 9 jurisdictions across the country. So, we'll be looking to collaborate and share that sort of responsibility. It'll happen a lot more once we get out, past COVID. At the moment, there are real restrictions on who we can see face to face anyway.
Mike, if I might
Yeah,
add
Nick.
something here. I've recently been asked to update the terms of reference and the college bylaws, the terms of reference for the Council of Branches and the bylaws for the college.
Yep.
And in relation to the confidentiality clause and the information dissemination clauses, they have been updated for the board's consideration.
Right.
With a recommendation that we have a summary of information that is circulated, but it's circulated under the confidentiality clause, which remains in the Constitution.
Yep. That's good advice. Thank you. And thank you for doing that work. I look forward to seeing that come to the board fairly soon, I imagine. Thank you. Claire's fourth dot point goes to the accreditation program. I have spoken about this previously. I think at the moment we're probably at the end of the first 5-year cycle of the accreditation program. And of course, COVID's sort of come at a really bad time for us. I mean, it came at a bad time for a whole lot of reasons, but it did in terms of the accreditation process. And because of the nature of the accreditation process, there are real issues surrounding the site visit aspect of it and being able to communicate effectively with people and to be able to do the things you need to do as part of an accreditation process. So in a sense, we've sort of deferred it for a period of time. And there are 1 or 2 universities that are coming up for accreditation renewal, for instance, and we've put a moratorium on that for a period of time to enable us to get back into a, whatever normal is going to be, some sort of a normal operational environment. So I think the board decided at its last meeting that in all likelihood we would sit on the accreditation review process and commence it at around about the end of this year once we're able to move forward. So in terms of your immediate question, Claire, who will be consulted and who's going to be doing it. At this stage, no decisions have been made in respect of that. So the process sits there as it was originally developed, and we currently have an application before us that I expect will go forward using the existing program. There will be a review program, but I doubt that we'll be able to move to put it into operation until toward the end of the year. Any comments you'd like to make about any of the responses to any of those dot points, Claire, before we move on?
No, not at this point.
Okay, thanks.
I think Carolyn Richardson had her hand up. Mike, Carolyn, did you?
Okay, yep, Carolyn.
Oh, hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand that you can't reveal the contents of confidential conversations within committee meetings. But I think what we don't really know is what the college is telling these committee meetings. So while you can't tell us what they're saying, I think that there's some room for you to tell us what you're saying. For example, when you said that you've been telling these forums what mental health nurses do, I don't really know what the college think mental health nurses do. There's lots of different opinions about that. So it would be good for nurses to get some reassurance about what the college is actually telling government about what nurses can do and what nurses want. Thanks.
Yep, I think that's a reasonable question. The college has had a position on the kinds of things you would expect of a qualified mental health nurse in this country for some considerable time. I mean, our view is that mental health nurses are people who satisfy the credentialing requirements and or hold formal qualifications in mental health nursing. And one of the things we've made clear at our various levels of representation to health bureaucracy and politicians is that a registered nurse working in a mental health service or a mental health setting is not necessarily a mental health nurse. And that was at the heart of that most recent press release that we put out. And it was very much on that basis we felt those figures were very misleading. And that's long been the view of the college. So that would be the beginning point. And I think that's certainly, I mean, I'm only about to join this Commonwealth level strategic committee at the first meeting I'm representing, that I'll be present at will be tomorrow. Stephen's been involved in them from since when he became CEO, but I imagine that's the position that you put on behalf of the college, Stephen. Absolutely,
it's certainly been that direction. And as I said earlier, one of the key elements is that ability for employers or governments to be able to identify what is a mental health nurse. And there's stuff on the website that outlines that, but that's the key area that is quite grey at the moment, and is something that there's a lot of discussion about. Yeah. I mean, there's been a long and in many ways sometimes acrimonious debate about what is a mental health nurse, and I don't know that it's ever been fully resolved. In some ways, it's probably easier to say more about what isn't a mental health nurse. But one of the things we've been keen to point out to health bureaucracies and politicians is that at the very least, you know, if you want to be able to identify a mental health nurse, you should go looking for people with formal qualifications and experience within our discipline. And that hasn't been happening. And it hasn't been happening for decades, unfortunately, and that's what we're trying to change.
Donna Hanson-Bella has her hand up, Mike. Would we like to, Donna, would you
Donna.
like to?
Thank you, Mike. I just wanted to add to the conversation around what is actually being told to people around what do members of the college do. And we do at the board level recognise that I think it's less than 1/3 of our members are credentialed, and we have to represent the entirety of our membership, which are registered nurses who hold specialist qualifications in mental health. So whether that's through additional postgraduate training or direct entry psychiatric nurse training. So it is that broader sense of mental health nursing. And the other thing I think I just want to encourage people, if during your busy working lives you haven't yet had the opportunity to read the latest publication, is also going to the efforts of doing profiles of some of the diversity of our work as mental health nurses. I think, you know, the last one I read a profile, John and some of the other members in there around trying to help people understand the diversity in our work. And that was very strategic and required in the context of some of the lack of awareness about the amazing work that mental health nurses do and the difference they make. So there's multiple approaches there to trying to bring people's awareness and putting it in print as to the diversity of the work that we do.
Yep. Thank you, Donna. I noticed that someone just asked a question about what about enrolled nurses? What I can say about that is that the Accreditation and Education Committee at the moment are currently they're at the beginning of a process of considering the college's position, what it ought to be and how it ought to unfold in the coming years in relation to enrolled nurses. There is a recognition that there are a considerable number of enrolled nurses working in the mental health field. Many of them are very committed to mental health, and we feel that they do have a role in the college, and the college should actually have a role in trying to influence the kind of education they get within from a mental health perspective. And I think what you can see developing in the coming years will be a much more carefully considered college position on enrolled nurses that would be much more inclusive and more embracing than it's ever been previously. I think we need to go on to the next question, Ellen.
Do we have a moment for Sonia to just make a contribution?
Yeah, please do. Yep.
Sonia, did you have something quickly you'd like to say?
Hi everyone. Look, I'm just adding to what's already been said. I've been a mental health nurse for 35 plus years, and when I first started out, I was actually a registered psychiatric nurse at one stage, but of course that's no longer the case. And I often, this debate and discussion about what we actually do has been going on for, like Michael said, decades. So we do need to get that clarified somehow along the way so that we get more recognition and we don't get swept under the carpet like what has happened before. So yep. I'm really pleased that the college is taking this on. And yeah, it's great. And as I was a bit concerned about what you were saying about the data that's been collected recently as to how many nurses are actually qualified, or not really sure if I understand what you meant with that. but because I find, look, I work in many settings. Currently, I'm a facilitator with a uni at the moment with mental health student nurses, and I also do acute work. And I've worked in community. I've done lots of different areas, and I often find a lot of nurses in acute, they have no mental health qualifications. They're just registered nurses. They're very interested in mental health, but that's about as far as it goes. And I think that's the dangerous precedent that we're setting if we constantly employ people that aren't necessarily formally qualified in some way. Anyway, that's all I've got to say at the matter, because we could discuss it for hours.
Thank you, Sonia. Look, there are about 77 people enrolled for this forum, and I suspect that there are 76 other people who agree with everything you've just said. And you know, the press release I referred to related to what the college considers as some really misleading data that was recently released by the Australian Institute of Health and Wellbeing, where they suggested there were 23,000 approximately mental health nurses around the country. And our response was, well, there might be 23,000 working in whatever you might think a mental health service setting is, but a large number of those won't have any qualifications at all in mental health nursing. So on that basis, we argue that's really misleading and misrepresents the nature of the mental health nursing workforce, which I think is very consistent with the concerns you've just expressed.
Would we like to move on to the next question?
Yes, let's please move on. So Janine is asking, when will there be an increase in the number of subsidised Medicare sessions for mental health workers, nurses in private practice? Social workers and psychologists have had a number of subsidised sessions doubled due to COVID. My clients are upset that they cannot receive this for my service. Look, we're very aware of this, and it's part of the ongoing representations that the college makes to the very sorts of committees and representations that we've referred to several times already this evening in the forum. In the end, all we can do make cases, put pressure on, advocate in relation to, we're not really in a position to actually force change in these areas, but believe me, we do our best and we keep the pressure up. Part of the reason why I suggested earlier that maybe, you know, we can diversify our strategy by, I think, maybe going and taking more opportunities to make representation at the Commonwealth, at the state and territory level in addition to the Commonwealth. I think we've reached the stage where the Commonwealth committees seem to be fairly intransigent on this at the moment. But I'm starting to see some signs that maybe there's a greater preparedness to consider particular initiatives that would be more engaging of mental health nurses, and where the initiatives are rather more innovative than what we seem to be able to get past the Commonwealth at the moment. Stephen, do you have any comments, or any other board members?
If I can just comment, Janine and I have exchanged a few emails on this particular one, which have submitted the question, and she provided some detailed background numbers and information, which I've took to the department today, and they were very receptive as to, oh, okay, it came all the way back to the full circle of, okay, where does a mental health nurse sit and what are the qualifications to support that? However, they certainly took on board this question and the supporting doco. So thank you, Janine. What'll come of it, we'll find out.
Yep. Donna?
Whilst that's,
I notice you've unmuted. Do you want to add a comment?
Because I just have to share some facts about this. So I think that this is an issue about, and it doesn't actually matter in my experience of almost 30 years working in this sector, of who's in the seat at the federal level, but this is an actual issue about keeping at bay what nurses and to some degree midwives are actually recognised and funded to do at a Commonwealth level. So in relation to the review, the 5-year review process of the MBS that had over 40 different committees, and for us as mental health nurses, we were very blessed to actually have 2 of our members sitting on 2 of those committees. That process was in terms of the review of the MBS items was undertaken or wound up after 5 years in about June of last year. And on the 14th of December, the Department of Health federal website published their task force review, which essentially in relation to nursing and in particular mental health nursing is very, very, very disappointing. It clearly provides no recognition or new interest in actually developing our expertise. And as a board member, this was something that we discussed with Stephen, hence his needing to have further conversations in the department. So I'm not breaking confidentiality by saying what I'm saying, because I'm not in those meetings that Stephen's in, but I want people to be very clear that there are certain threats. So not only did they not necessarily agree to give new items for nurses and in particular mental health nurses, that in the reports that I read, there's actually also some potential threats to making moves to decrease some of the previously quarantine funding that we know and appreciate as the old mental health nurse program funding. So that was what part of the reason that Stephen's been having some of these additional meetings to actually try and raise the awareness about the detrimental impacts to our community if the government decides, the Commonwealth government decides to adopt all of those recommendations. So I think, you know, all of us can actually read what those reports are because they're public reports, and I spent a bit of time reading some of them in my own time, and which is why I had escalated to Stephen and other board members around the issues of concern, you know, in particular, some of the ones around potentially trying to redivert the funding. Now, why is this an issue? It's an issue because it's massive, massive funding that's given to other professions. So it's around $300 million of Commonwealth funding that goes to our psychology colleagues. It's around 30 million that currently goes to our social work colleagues. It's around, I think, 7 million that goes to our OTs. So none of those yet are willing to give up their money to actually allow us to start getting funded. So, you know, that's the context that this advocacy is going on. And I'm very supportive of what Steve has put in his report about the importance for us to look outside of the Commonwealth and start working a bit more closely with our states who at this stage, or at least in Victoria, have had a lot more desire to want to actually privilege the role of mental health nursing. I'll hop off my soapbox now.
Thank you.
Hi,
I think
Kim here, Mike.
Yep.
Just wondered if I could add to what Donna's said. And I'm going to, it's not my usual form, but in my older age, I'm becoming far more political about these things. I think, you know, as a profession, we've been very polite and very considered, and we've advocated for many years with Commonwealth, etc., about these matters, and we're getting nowhere. And I think the time has probably come for us to be far more trenchant about the issues and to go and to have a collective campaign around recognition for nurses with MBS, for nurse practitioners, and for recognition of us as independent practitioners and for our skill set. Because what we've been doing is not working and they're not listening. One of the arguments that the Commonwealth has put forward about not putting nurses on the MBS, etc., is that they don't want to open up a can of worms for every other allied health to come on board. But that's a weak argument, and it's not recognising, as Donna has said, this is discriminatory. It's discriminatory against us as a profession. It's discriminatory against our consumers. And the work that we can do in the community with vaccination, for example, at the moment, and with mental health care and delivery, with psychotherapy, etc. So I would say I think the time has come for us to be far more political about it and to go outside the usual realms and perhaps do things like write pieces in the conversation, to be on radio and television, to go outside those realms to try and get some action.
Strategically, we could use vaccination as a lever in this climate to actually lever them into acknowledging that mental health clients need mental health nurses. And if we want our mental health clients vaccinated and their physical health is at a low compared to the rest of the population. So that's another lever in which we can argue that mental health nurses need to be at the forefront of this.
Look, I agree with those comments from both Mick and Kim. I think one of the implications that comes out of your comments, Kim, is that we really need to be going back and probably in some cases rebuilding strategic relationships with other sections of the nursing profession.
Yes.
You know, for instance, in recent developments, some of the recent reports that have come out, and particularly the whole, Medicare review process, the range of subsidised services nurse practitioners could provide actually reduced. They declined.
Yeah.
So, we're not the only ones that are feeling aggrieved. And I think that if we can get together and form some blocks where all the profession are represented, and maybe, we got into a situation where we just weren't talking to each other sufficiently, or in some cases at all, I think we need to go back and rebuild those relationships.
The ear of Ian Hickey, the ear of Patrick McGorry, the ear of the head of the College of Psychiatrists, the head of the AMA, the head of the Emergency Medicine, they're all people that we need to talk to.
Yep. And some of those conversations are already happening. So, they take time to build, but we have started that process, but I completely agree with you. I mean, I think the other thing we could be saying is that, if you think the Productivity Commission report has any credence, and a lot of people do, what used to be called better access has been funding very handsomely what is fundamentally a failed social policy. The productivity report, amongst other reports, was scathing about its lack of effectiveness, and yet it continues in a slightly modified version. So, these are the sorts of things that can be argued, but I think, we're a relatively small player. What we need to do is work with the entire nursing profession, I think, in a much more a collaborative approach, and collectively there are an awful lot of us. I think the college needs to go building those alliances with other sections of the profession.
Yes, and mounting a campaign that gets out into social media and into the community. Yep.
I think we need to pursue that really, and pretty quickly. Janine, any comeback, any comments you'd like to make in relation? Your question sparked that discussion.
I'm not sure Janine's with us.
Okay.
Sorry, Mike, I can't see.
No, that's all right.
She is on our RSVP list, but she's not present. I can see Vicky would like to make a contribution. Vicky Green.
Yep.
Thank you. Hello, Mike. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to endorse what Donna was saying around that MBS review. I think it's absolutely imperative that we advocate quickly. The other domain that I think we need to really be thinking about is NDIS. So as I understand it, there's no line item in NDIS and any of the planning lines for mental health nursing. There is a line for nursing, generic nursing, but not mental health nursing. And I think, as psychosocial disability is more and more recognised, mental health nursing is absolutely well placed, best placed, in fact, in many instances to meet the needs of those mental health consumers. And we hear it time and time again that that's what mental health consumers are asking for.
Yep. Thank you.
Can I say something? I can't find the put the hand up button.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Yep. I'm Julie Scott and I'm a credentialed mental health nurse, and I've been not a political player, but I've been rocked around with the political system way back when I first became a nurse practitioner back in the early days. We are up against the AMA and the body of psychologists, and they're very powerful players. The new Medicare rebate numbers for them now allows them to have fuel rebates when they visit residential aged care. The Medicare rebates allows practice nurses now to deliver mental health services. We have a huge mammoth task ahead of us. We're on a playing field now with OTs and social workers having access to the Medicare rebate system for mental health. And us as nurses who are very well trained and qualified, wonderful skills, we're up against some very powerful stakeholders. I don't know how you overcome that, and I do all I could to help. I'm going to move myself forward and be a nurse practitioner again in mental health, and even then you're restricted with Medicare. numbers. It's a really difficult thing, but you have to recognise how brutal it is. It's a brutal playing field, and there's some very strong players out there. And the psychologists have formed themselves into a great group. The ATs have, and of course nurses have often been seen as the handmaidens for GP. So we have opposition. Yes, they throw some funding at us. I'm picking up a bit of funding now through the primary healthcare networks, but that's obviously going to limit itself because now the Medicare has extended itself where people now are getting travelling rebates to go to residential aged care. So I'll do all I can to help, but you know, it's a brutal playing field. To think that people are interested in people's mental well-being is like Pollyanna land, and I say that from a 70-year-old perspective who's rolled with a few punches in our system. And you know, it has to be united. It can't just be a press release here and something here and maybe some nice person's going to take our case. That's not the playing field we're on. So unfortunately, and as tragic and sad as it is, because nurses provide the best care ever, and we provide a holistic care, and we do a great job. I don't know. I mean, I'm really sad when I see nurse practitioners now even having limited access to Medicare rebates. And they say, you know, they're years to train, like all nurses, even to get to a specialised area like mental health. It takes years to train, not to mention the quals that go with that. So there's my case.
Okay.
I'm really sad about the whole lot.
Thank you for those comments. Ellen, I think we're going to run out of time, so we do need to move on to make sure we cover at least the remaining pre-submitted questions.
Yes. So next question is from Helen Kelly, who's a Vic Branch committee member.
Yep. So this relates to the development of the annual collaborative conference in Victoria, and the question relates to whether this model has been considered in other states as a way to promote mental health nursing Australia-wide. John Hurley, I think in your region within New South Wales, you've been doing something similar, haven't you? Or you've at least been contemplating the possibility of doing so.
Yeah, look, we've been doing a couple of things. Mike and Helen have been working with the PHN to do a co-design for mental health nursing services, to try and sort of reframe how they view the skills and the scope of practice of mental health nurses. And we've been doing annual conferences in our area for quite some time, collaboratively for sure.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, John. Anyone else have a comment they'd like to make in relation to Helen's question? Okay, thank you. Ellen, we'll go on to the last of the pre-submitted questions if we could, thanks.
Okay, next question is from Sharon Ashman.
Yep. I don't really have any comments on this one, but perhaps someone who might be closer to developments on the ground with this might be in a position to comment. I think perhaps our colleagues in Victoria might be well placed to make some comments.
Is Sharon online? Could she make the comment, explain a bit further? Nope.
No.
Move on.
Yep.
No, sorry, Sharon's not online with us this evening.
All right. A thought did occur to me in relation to some of the earlier comments. I mean, look, it's certainly we would be wise to remember at all times how powerful groups such as, you know, the psychologists and the psychiatrists can be. But I think we should also recognise that, particularly with psychiatry, they can be very, very powerful collaborators and allies. Certainly, I know John Hurley, through his work, has close connections with a number of very influential psychiatrists. Stephen and I have recently had representations from one of the state branches of the College of Psychiatrists who are very keen to have the college join them in a joint submission going forward. And certainly in the context of those discussions, those senior psychiatrists were extremely complimentary about the importance of mental health nursing and how much they feel they've appreciated the input of mental health nursing colleagues, within the services they offer as psychiatrists. So, on one hand, I think we're wise to think about, the risks that medicine and psychiatry can pose for us, but on the other hand, they can also be extremely useful allies. So I think that's an approach that would be very important. When I talk about building alliances with nursing, I think we should also be equally thinking about, those other groups within the mental health field we can build alliances with. And I think psychiatry would be one that I would think very much so, but also the carer and consumer advocacy groups as well, I think, who have a lot in common with the kinds of things that are very important to us. The things that concern them tend to concern us greatly. So I think that there are real possibilities there. Many of us have those relationships with carer and consumer organisations informally. I think maybe we could be looking to formalise them and strengthen them more.
Mike, it's Mick here. I also think that we need to become more politically active, and I'm personally involved with my political party. I go to meetings. I speak personally with Bill Shorten at our local branch meeting. I'm on an ALP Health Policy Committee, and I'm a member of the union. I think that they're all the ways in which we can advocate and speak on behalf of mental health nursing and make the public aware of what mental health nursing and the value of mental health nursing is to the consumer.
Thanks, Mick. Elle, we've got through the pre-received questions, and I think our time's just about up. Can we squeeze in 3 or 4 final minutes if anyone has a question or a point they'd like to make before we close?
Michael, it's Chris Brooke here from Victoria. I think that last question was asking a specific thing about whether the college is involved in discussions around the complex care, mental health integrated and complex care funding that is available through PHNs. And I guess that's the question that needs to be answered. Is the college involved in any discussions around that? And if they're not, why not? And also, if they were to be involved in discussions around that, accessing that program or funding, what would be the capacity for the mental health nurses that are out there in the community?
Thank you. Stephen, are you in a position to be able to address that?
Couple of things, and I'm not sure if I'm hitting the nail on the head. I am meeting with, met regularly with the group within the Department of Health who look after PHNs, and we are working on an engagement paper for them to use to the engaging with mental health nurses for PHNs across the country. Now, there's also work done with PHNs in Victoria, specifically with Head to Health and some other engagement with mental health nurses. Now, I don't know specifically which particular specific program perhaps that this is being, that you're commenting on, this targets. I only just saw this one just now, so I haven't been able to do homework on that one.
Well, Head to Help you mentioned is it's a discrete short-term funding model just for COVID.
I doubt if it'll be short-term. They're certainly talking about rolling it out nationally.
Well, they're only funding until October at the moment, and they're not talking about extending it at this stage.
Internally, they are, yeah.
But that's a completely different thing.
Okay.
That's a discrete funding model on its own. So, but that's useful, but it's not specifically about mental health nursing. That they are multidisciplinary teams, just looking at the mental health needs of people who are suffering because of the stresses of COVID. So this is the other things that the PHN has funding for are much broader and much more accessible to all mental health nurses in community.
I think that is something we have been working on, because it is for it's for all PHNs across the country. We did have some success in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland with it recently. Now, whether that extends down to your area, I don't know at this stage. But I'm certainly, if you give me some background, I'll go and ask the questions and make sure we are covering that off. There's a lot of moving parts out there, and we cover off what we can. Yeah.
Yep, sure.
Look, I think Stephen's last point's a very important one. You know, I'd point out that there is no reason why individual members can't actually approach Stephen and say, look, here's a particular issue that we think is relevant to the college. Could this be pursued through your representations? And in fact, we would encourage you to do so. Because, you know, really any sort of reconnaissance we can get from any of the jurisdictions across the country just adds to what it is that we can actually, you know, bring into those representations. And the more stories we get, I think, from different jurisdictions, particularly where the same stories keep repeating in different parts of the country, I think start to become very useful.
I guess also just on that, but please be mindful that some of our members are actually really doing amazing work in this space. And John spoke very briefly before about the work he's trying to do with his PHNs to actually have a greater understanding of the role of mental health nurses and their value to the community. So it's around being aware of that and then making the links so that work can be replicated. So my understanding is that a lot of PHNs now get to make their own decisions about how they use their bucket of money for their communities, and we have to try and influence at each level of each different PHN rather than just one oversight of the PHN, because they're now allowed to make decisions at the PHN level.
Yeah, and I think that's why the earlier comments about, you know, the college moving on a number of different levels. I mean, you know, people like Stephen can actually deal at the Commonwealth level. Many of us can actually deal with our local jurisdictions. I think our time's up, Ellen.
I think so.
I think we'll have to draw it to a close. Look, can I thank you all? I think that's been a really useful and very engaging conversation. It's certainly given me some food for thought. I'm sure it has for Stephen and the other board members as well. The next scheduled board meeting is next week. So this has been very useful in terms of things that can go forward into that meeting. The one thing I will mention that I meant to mention in my introductory comments was that at the last forum, I said that about this time of the year, we were expecting to be able to send you out a survey as part of the process of developing a strategic plan. We're a couple of weeks off being able to do that, and the board will consider that situation. But in communication I've had with Stephen earlier today, I just wanted to get a sense of when I might be able to tell you when you might be able to expect to see that survey. And I think we're about 2 weeks off. So at this stage, we're aiming to send that out to members to provide input into what you think is important in terms of a developing strategic plan and the directions you'd like to see the college going in over the next 3 or more years. And I think our aim, Stephen, is to be able to send that survey out around about the beginning of March, is it not?
You ready for it?
Yeah, that's right. So I think there are 1 or 2 things. I can't recall if we've taken any questions on notice, but there are things you'd like followed up. Please do feel free to send them directly to Stephen or send them to me and I'll pass them on. This session has been recorded. If there's anything you'd like to go back and check or follow up to hear any of the comments or explanations. And if you have any subsequent questions that you would like, that, you know, the discussion has caused you to think of other issues you'd like to raise, please feel free to send them through to Ellen Fraser, and we can work on via Ellen on providing a response. So again, thank you very much for your attendance. Do we have the next one of these scheduled, Ellen? Are we thinking another 3 months' time?
We are hoping the next couple of months, but we will send out a notification with the date shortly. Right. So we will provide the link to everybody as well for the recording today, just so that we can watch that at a later date, and that'll be in College Connection, and I can tell everybody the date for the next forum then.
Great, thanks, Ellen, and thanks everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks. I'm so glad when I don't have to remove people.
I could read that in your face.
Like I'm like,
waiting for the
"Oh,
Pac-Man to come and get somebody.
please leave on your own accord."
Yep, that's right.
Oh God.
Yep. Look, nothing unexpected there. It's I know that there are very real limitations on what we can do around